The 484th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Good! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down one. 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! He got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Goss.
Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson. And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark. And this year the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony here with you guys on a Sunday night, a little bit after the AFC divisional playoff game has gone final between the Ravens and the Bills. And as we promised you last night, we'd be back tonight to preview Carolina's game at Wake Forest on Tuesday. It's a big game for Carolina. It's a big game in the, I guess, the rivalry, if you will. It's an old Big Four matchup, and it's going to have a lot of importance for both teams on it. So we felt like we'd dedicate a live edition of the show to it. And with tomorrow being a holiday, figured even if we went late, it was better than not going live at all. So over the next 35 minutes or so, we'll get you ready for that matchup with the Demon Deacons on Tuesday. Tell you everything you need to know about Steve Forbes' squad. Look at the game from Carolina's perspective. Discuss how important this game is for Carolina. Give our keys to the game and pick the game. But we start every edition of the pod, as we always do, with the pod thought of the day. We go to Michael Jordan for today's pod thought. Thought this was appropriate coming off of the result on Saturday. That thought is, quote, accept a loss as a learning experience and never point fingers at your teammates, end quote. And that's what Carolina's got to use Saturday as a minor, hopefully it's nothing more than a minor setback that they can learn a lot from. And I don't really worry so much about them pointing fingers at one another. I think despite all the ups and the downs and the trials and the tribulations that this year has presented, this group has stayed together. But they got to look at Saturday as a learning experience. You know, R.J. Davis said after the game, we just felt like their defensive intensity wasn't there in the last 4 to 5 minutes of the game. If I had to bet, this game on Tuesday night is going to be close when you get to that final media timeout. So learn from what failed you previously to put you in a better position possible to close out the game better. So, I was trying to find a good quote to really set the tone for this game. And as disappointing as Saturday was and is, and to be quite frank, I'm still ticked off about it, still a little irked about what happened in the Smith Center on Saturday afternoon. It could still be used as a positive if Carolina learns and grows from their latest defeat.
Yeah, they have no choice but to, because now you're right back to where you were really before that game, which is you're pretty much back into must-win mode. I think Carolina was afforded, one loss in conference that was going to be a bad loss. And now that's almost guaranteed to be a quad 3 loss. So, I mean, we were looking at it as maybe, a quad 2 loss would be probably what Carolina would take. And even then, there would be a lot of people saying that Carolina simply cannot lose another game like that the rest of the season. Now you're dealing with a quad 3 loss. And again, the opportunities to pick up quad 1 wins are really not there. I mean, Pittsburgh is the one team that you look at. That game on the road is going to be very, very important for Carolina. If they can get that one, you would hope that Pittsburgh finds a way to stay inside of the top 75. And then, Clemson, there's opportunities that are out there, but there's very few. And so, this game, this is crucial for Carolina to be able to find a way to win this one. Wake Forest is a team that could eventually climb into quad 1 since this is a road game. But I think for Carolina, the mindset has to be now, look, we're playing with desperation again, and we put ourselves in this situation. I think that, if you're looking back on Saturday, it should really be fuel for this game. You should feel like you got robbed. You should feel like the officiating at the end of the game didn't help you. You didn't help yourselves either, but you should also feel, some anger about how everything went down, some anger with yourselves, but some anger with the situation that ended up happening where they didn't call the travel, double dribble, whatever you wanted at the end. So hopefully that's the mindset that this team is taking coming into this game, that, hey, we're using that game as fuel to sort of spur the rest of the season for us, and we're not going to let this loss do what we saw some of the other losses this season do, which is snowball on us.
Yeah, as of right now, this game would qualify as a quad 2 game. Wake Forest is 77th in the net. And there's still, probably a few results I got to go final tonight. I don't think there are any games scheduled for tomorrow, with it being the national title game in college football. So going into the game, barring something unforeseen, it's going to be a quad 2 game for Carolina, but there's still value in winning quad 2 games. Carolina has made up a lot of ground in quad 2. So if they can pick up a win and it stays in quad 2, that's fine. If it moves into quad 1 as the season moves along, then that becomes even more beneficial. But, you can't, as much as Carolina wants to win the game, they can't get caught up in all the quad 1, quad 2 stuff. They just got to win and let the metrics and let the stuff take care of itself. As I said last night, this team metrically shakes out to be an NCAA tournament team. From where they are in KenPom, from where they are in the net, they're one of the best at-large teams that the sport has to offer. What they need to do is really put together a body of work that takes the decision out of the committee's hands. And that's what the team didn't do 2 years ago. Like when Carolina missed the tournament, we came on here and said there wasn't a whole lot to be mad about because they didn't have a resume. Like there was a team that just did nothing really in any quadrant whatsoever. That's not the case with this year's team. Carolina has a lot of losses in quad 1, but they've also made up for it with some quality wins in quad 2. They've got the quote-unquote bad loss right now to Stanford, but I think that team is much better than what their metrics would suggest. You look at this game, and we turn our attention to Wake Forest. The Deacons are 14-4, and they're 6-1 in the ACC. They are 9-0 at the Joel. So that's going to be the best environment for them all year long. They've been good at home. They'll be looking to improve upon that on Tuesday night. Their wins in conference play include Boston College, Syracuse, NC State, Miami, Stanford, and Virginia Tech. And their lone loss in conference play so far has been on the road at Clemson. Albeit from the fact that they beat Stanford and we did not, the lot of the conversation around this Wake team has kind of been the same thing around the Carolina team that we cover day in, day out, which is if you hear from the Wake Forest fan base, all 4 of them, they would tell you, we don't know how good this team really is because they haven't beaten anybody. And they got beat by Michigan in the non-con and Florida in the non-con, but you got to play what your schedule is, and that right now has allowed them to race out to a 6-1 start. They have 3 players that average double-figure scoring, led by Hunter Salas, who's 19.5 points per game, leads them 4.2 points, 2.9 or 4.2 rebounds, 2.9 assists. He's shooting 48% from the field, 32% from 3. Cam Hildreth, their second leading scorer, 13.9 points, 4.1 rebounds, 3.2 assists. He's shooting 41% from the field, 32% from three. And then Trevon Spillers as their last guy to average double-figure scoring, 10.3 points, 8.8 rebounds, 0.5 assists. He shoots 55% from the field, 28% from three. The interesting stat that stands out when you look at this Wake Forest team is the fact that they literally cannot shoot the ball. They shoot 28% from behind the three-point line. And oddly enough, as someone that watches the sport and has watched this Wake team like I have for the last couple of years, a big philosophy change for Steve Forbes and that program. First couple of years when he built them back up, this was a team that could score 80, 85, 90 points on just about anybody. This year, they've become a much more defensive-minded team. And they've had to because their inability to really shoot the ball well from the outside. And that's something that really cost them the last couple of years in terms of not being able to get over the hump and make the NCAA tournament. So what do you make of this Wake Forest team that's going to be ready for Carolina on Tuesday night to improve upon their hot start to conference play?
Yeah, it's a weird team because the thing is that you mentioned how they really haven't improved shooting the basketball from three. That was an area that it was when you looked at this team and you looked at why they were struggling early in the season, that was the first thing that you pointed to. You said this team simply just cannot shoot the ball from the outside. And you would think that with the fact that they have started to gain their footing, the fact that they've won 5 in a row, they would be shooting the ball better from the outside. And that's really just not the case. They're not, I mean, they've had some games here recently where they've shot it a little better, but it's certainly not the way that they are winning games. And so this will be interesting for Carolina. That's an area where, you look at the game on Saturday, a big part of why Stanford was able to win was because they were able to hit timely shots from the outside. This is a team that hasn't been able to do that all year, and their fans are pretty frustrated about it. So we'll see. I mean, that 5-game winning streak that I talked about, while it may seem impressive on the surface, I mean, they've beaten Syracuse. They beat them by 10. NC State, they beat rather convincingly. But then a 10-point win over Miami, who is just one of the worst teams. They might be one of the worst power conference teams we have ever seen in college basketball. I mean, they are just downright terrible. But I will say that the win over Stanford was very impressive. And, they did find a way to go on the road and beat Virginia Tech. And that was a game that was close in the first half. And granted, 9-point game in the end, but still able to pull out a victory on a road in a place that's not really all that easy to win year in and year out. I mean, the thing for them is they're entering an extremely important stretch of their season. They got Carolina, then they play Duke, Louisville, and Pittsburgh. That's really the stretch where you're going to find out how serious of a contender this team actually is in the conference, and ultimately how serious of a chance they have at making the NCAA tournament. So, I mean, Carolina's looked at out of that group. I would say, Pittsburgh probably a team that you circle now more than you would circle Carolina. But I mean, coming off the loss to Stanford, that's a team that Wake Forest beats. So Wake Forest probably feels like they have a pretty decent chance to beat Carolina. So, I mean, Carolina's got to be prepared. They've got a guard that can score the ball incredibly well in Hunter Salas. Hildreth is a veteran. And, both Spillers and Reed could give Carolina some issues inside, which is something that, we saw Stanford be able to do primarily with one big. Now these are two guys. I mean, Spillers, even at 6'7", he basically plays like a big. So this is going to be a test for Carolina. It'll be interesting to see how they respond coming off of the loss. But this is certainly a team that I think is starting to look a little bit more of the part of what they were projected to be in the preseason. I feel like, honestly, this team comes in a very similar spot to what Carolina was coming into Saturday. Now the question is can Carolina be the team that ends up spoiling what seems to be a good run here for Wake Forest, which in a lot of their fans' minds could be them turning their season around?
Yeah, I think, Wake Forest, they'll say publicly they're not talking about with this week. They're going game by game. Steve Forbes knows how big this week is for him and his program, and ultimately his job security. He's done a really good job with that program, but none of that matters if you can't get into the tournament. And I think a big sign that maybe this group is different, this team is different, that road win at Virginia Tech, not impressive on paper by any means. That's a game the last 2 years that team loses. And that's the type of games that kept his team out of the NCAA tournament. So, I know Virginia Tech is not having the year that they've wanted to have. And Mike Young and that crew are very frustrated. But when you look at the losses that have kept Notre Dame out of the big dance in the last couple of years, it were games like that kept them out. They've won those games so far to really put themselves in position to be a legitimate NCAA tournament team come Selection Sunday. You look at this game from Carolina's perspective. Of course, they bring in with them a 12-7 record, 5-2 in conference play, 3-2 away from the Smith Center, and on a true road environment. Those road wins are at Hawaii, Notre Dame, and NC State. The road losses are respectable at Kansas and at Louisville. Carolina has 4 players averaging double-figure scoring, led by R.J. Davis, 17.3 points, 3.9 rebounds, 4.0 assists, shooting 38% from the field, 29% from three. He's on the verge of finally climbing out of the 20 percentile in terms of three-point shooting. Ian Jackson is the second leading scorer, 15.2 points, 3.7 rebounds, 0.9 assists. He's shooting 50% from the field, 39% from three. Seth Trimble, the third leading scorer, 12.6 points, 4.7 rebounds, 1.6 assists, shooting 46% from the field, 36% from three. And then Elliot Cadeau, the last guy to average double-figure scoring, 10.4 points, 3.1 rebounds, 5.8 assists. He's shooting 44% from the field, 28% from three. And in ACC play, Carolina is the number one defense in the conference in terms of opponent field goal percentage. They're holding teams to shooting 38% from the field, and they're number one in three-point percentage. Teams are shooting just 24% from behind the three-point line against Carolina. Let's now get into the discussion topic, and it's something that I floated out at the very top of the show. And we were kind of thinking about it when thinking about this game. I asked Wes Bryant, the co-host of the Wes and Walker Show that you produce, who, of course, is a Wake grad and the most foremost ACC guy on the station, meaning, or ABC or anybody but Carolina, a guy that just, loves to hate Carolina. I think he loves to hate Carolina more than he loves to support Wake Forest. But I asked him, I said, is this the biggest game these two teams have played since they met in the 2008-2009 season? That was a game in January that featured two top five teams. That game on the road for Carolina it was a tie-dye game. That was when Jeff Teague and the Demon Deacons got out to that really fast start. I think they started that year, 13-0 at one point. That team would go on to lose in the first round to Cleveland State that year in the NCAA tournament. But, really since then, even though Carolina was kind of middle of the pack in the mid-2010s while they were going through their NCAA tournament or they're in their NCAA investigation, after that year, man, Wake Forest just flatlined. They just bottomed out. They went through multiple coaches and really became irrelevant. And it hasn't really been since Steve Forbes got on there that this old Big Four matchup really has some pulse, really has some energy, has some juice. If you can remember back to what led to the rant to me of wanting Hubert Davis fired, it was a road loss at Wake Forest. That was before a road loss, I believe, at Miami. That really set the scene for that. That's what really got me going and really got the fire Hubert Davis thing going back during his first season on campus. So when you look at this matchup, and there's a lot of history, a lot of tradition between these two schools that are separated by about an hour and a half, is this the biggest matchup we've seen between them in almost 15 years?
And it's got to be up there, right? This Wake Forest team, 14-4, 6-1. I know their metrics are telling you that they're really not that great of a team, but you look at you look at the resume that they have and the losses. I mean, there's not a bad loss that's really there. I mean, Xavier is probably the worst loss that they have, and that Xavier team just went on the road and controlled the entire game and eventually won against Marquette. So, I mean, this is a legitimately good team that's rolling in here against a Carolina team that, yeah, I mean, I think is still a tournament team, probably going to be regarded as one of those teams that, in my mind, I said it to you the other day, a team that feels very similar to Roy's last team here. A group that I think, this point probably makes the NCAA tournament. And if they don't get beat in the first round, they probably feel pretty good about where this season actually ended up. So I think this is, in terms of importance, this definitely has to be one of the most important matchups since then, because I do think that in order for these teams to make the tournament, it feels like they kind of got to win this game. I think both teams probably look at it like that because there aren't a lot of great opportunities outside of this game for each of these teams, unless they can find a way to pull an upset against Duke. And the thing is that Duke is undefeated. I think at some point they're going to end up getting beat in conference play. But I mean, these opportunities going into these games, you can't just pass over them and say, we'll worry. If we lose this game, we've always got more opportunities. So I do think that this is going to be a really great matchup between these two sides. There'll be a lot of energy in that building. There always seems to be a pretty decent energy there whenever Carolina goes, but especially for this matchup where it's going to mean so much. Because I think you're right. I think for Wake Forest fans, even though, there were some close calls earlier in the season, there were some games that I think they felt like they should have beat opponents by more. I think this group, these fans are starting to come around on this group just a little bit. And I do think that this is a group that they believe in. So it's going to be a pretty tough environment for Carolina to walk into, but it should be a great matchup.
Yeah, I did some quick research on the topic, and there wasn't a game that stood out, just because I mentioned Wake Forest was down for so long that the games really meant Carolina had more to lose than they had to gain, and that was not fun, because I'll reiterate, when it comes to Wake Forest, and to me it's not as evident as it is with NC State. Our conference is better when the big four schools are good. Carolina, Duke, State, and Wake Forest. When those four schools are good and they're playing and competing at a high level, the ACC is better. Now, yes, we need our brands that are in the conference now, the Louisvilles, the Syracuses, to hold their end of the bargain. But there's so much history and tradition between those four schools that when they all are playing and competing at a high level, it does make the conference better, does make the conference deeper. And this game will have an old school feel back for their fan base. It'll feel like when, they had Chris Paul on campus in the early 2000s, or Tim Duncan in the late 90s, or Randolph Childress in the mid 90s, because there's a legitimate argument to be made that they have the better team. There might be an argument there to be made that even though Hubert Davis has done a lot, that they've got the better head coach in this matchup as of right now. And I don't know when's the last time you could actually say that between these two programs. So, and to me, that gets me fired up. Like, as someone that loves and values the rich tradition and the rich history of this conference, and Carolina is the one that gets the Carolina and Duke are the ones that get the majority of it. Wake Forest has some basketball history too, and that'll be on display, I think, tomorrow night or on Tuesday night. That environment it'll be the best that it's been all year long, and the one that Carolina will have to really navigate if they want to find a way to come away with a victory. So we'll go ahead and get right into our three keys to the game before we pick the game. The first key I have is for Carolina to get off to a fast start defensively, because that's something they just did not do in the Stanford game. The numbers would suggest Carolina played good defense, and I think that they did. Even though Reynaud had a 25-point double-double, shot 33% from the field while doing so, but they just never took care of they never took Stanford out of their rhythm. They never took them out of what they wanted to do. I felt like for the first time in conference play, they were able to get the shots that they wanted, whether make or miss, and it's why I feel like their confidence never dipped. And what RJ said after the game, where he felt like the intensity just waned in the closing minutes. You got to appreciate the honesty, but that's where we talk about what the pod thought. That's got to be a learning experience for this team. And you're talking about a game that's going to be a 9 p.m. tip, so you got to wait around all day to play. That arena will be hopping. There'll probably be some stuff special in the pregame to really get that crowd energized and ready to go. And Carolina cannot just settle into this. They got to be, from the moment that ball gets thrown up in the air, they got to be ready to play. And they got to be ready to get in a stance and guard, because I know the shooting numbers suggest that this team can't shoot the ball. We've seen Hunter Salas. We've seen Cam Hildreth. We've seen these guys. These guys can shoot it. These guys can score it. They would love nothing more to get back on track in a game at home against Carolina. And so I think this game, it really starts on the defensive end. And if we see the team that's number one in terms of opponent field goal percentage, or 3-point percentage, live up to that height, then Carolina gets after them defensively and sets the tone like they did on that end of the floor, as they did during that 4-game winning streak.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That's where it starts. And that's what was so frustrating about the other day, was that they had played so great defensively. They had taken away some legitimately good scorers. And, you could say whatever you want about Reynaud. And I thought for the most part, Carolina did a good job defensively against him. I thought he just made plays. And he is a really good player that, many Tar Heel fans were saying it. We would have been lucky if he would have actually went through and entered the transfer portal, because that dude is someone that will cause problems for some of the other bigs in this conference throughout this season. The thing that Carolina's got to do is they've got to find a way. It's very similar with Hunter Salas. You've got to find a way to just take away everybody else and make plays. I mean, we saw it, in a lot of the games that Carolina, won during that win streak. Carolina was doing it because their half-court defense was really, really good. And the reason why it was so good was because there was so much pressure on the ball. You didn't see that in the half court the other day. You saw a lot of guys that were left open. You saw way too much hedging to one side of the floor, leave an entire wing open, cross-court pass, and a nice, easy shot. And you could say, well, how many teams are going to be able to pass the ball as well and as efficiently as Stanford is? It doesn't matter. You can't leave guys that open and expect to have similar success to what you were having during the 4-game winning streak. And so Carolina, yeah, they've got to defend better in the half court, but this is also going to be on Hubert Davis early in the game. Let's set the tone with a little full-court pressure. You did it a little bit in the game against Stanford. And I get it. Second half, man, it seems like this is a trend that's going on in this conference this year, where the first half things are called a certain way, and in the second half they want to tighten the whistles up. I don't get it, but it is what it is. I think that in this first half, if you come out, set the tone with a little full court pressure, at least extend your defense and make them have to work offensively, then I think Carolina fans will be satisfied. If this is a team that just goes off and has a great night, they get into a rhythm early and there's just nothing you can do about it, even though you're guarding your rear ends off, well, then it is what it is. They just had a great night. They outplayed you, and we walk away. That wasn't what it felt like the other day on Saturday, and that's why you need to avoid a similar type of performance if you want to find a way to win this game.
Second key to the game, for me, it's get Ian Jackson back on track. He had his first bad game as a starter for Carolina, and I didn't freak out because at some point it was going to happen. Especially when you play the way that he plays, where it's a lot of one-on-one, there's going to be a game or two where the ball just does not find the bottom of the net. Unfortunately, that was Saturday, and even though I thought R.J. Davis stepped up and played at a high level, had 19 points, 5 assists, and 3 rebounds. We saw just how important Ian Jackson is, because even though Elliot Cadeau scored in double figures, you got big contribution from Finau and Lubin. It just wasn't enough. And being in person, being able to watch the game, and be in the gym with him, you could see that he lost his confidence. There were shots that were there to be took, especially I thought in the second half that in the previous games he's not even thinking about it. He's just letting that sucker fly. And he's probably making the shot more often than not. Didn't happen on Saturday. And credit Stanford for maybe getting him frustrated. And it was a young player who's really dealing with his first really off shooting night. But as we've talked about over the last month, he's not only Carolina's best scorer, he's Carolina's best player. And when he plays at a high level, it really takes this team to another dimension. And so he's got to get back on track. You've got to get him back in rhythm, and you've got to get his confidence back to where it was before the Stanford game. If I'm Hubert Davis, I'm not forcing things out of the gate, but the first couple possessions, I'm calling set plays. I'm getting him the ball. I'm putting him in pick and roll situations, maybe with Efton Reed, where he can get the big man to switch on him, and then he can dictate what's going to happen from there. Is he going to drive him? Is he going to lull him to sleep with his dribble and then pull up and hit that 18-foot jump shot that he loves to make, or is he going to make something happen for one of his teammates? I just find it hard to believe that Carolina can go on the road in a game like this that's as big as it is for them as it is for the home team, and find a way to win if their best player does not play big. Like, I'm not saying Jackson's got to score 25 plus, but I think this has to be a game where he's in double figures and a guy that you feel comfortable having on the floor at the under 4-minute timeout for his offense, something we didn't feel comfortable with against the Cardinal on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we've kind of gotten to that point where he's got to be a guy that's scoring at least double figures, if not, 15 plus. You should have found a way to win the other day, even with the struggles that he had, but I mean, you didn't. And I think, he hits another basket or two. That might be the difference in the game for you. The biggest thing here is that you've got to get him the ball early. Like, don't be afraid to go to him. And I don't think Carolina is, but like sometimes when this happens, you'll say, okay, well, he just had a really tough game. He was missing some shots. We're not going to put the ball in his hands. We're going to try to take the pressure off of him a little bit out of the gate and let other guys go to work. I think for him, he's a guy that needs the ball in his hands. Let him gain some confidence back. And this is a game where he should be able to go to work. This is a team that in Wake Forest that has had a really good start to the year defensively. But I want to see what they can do against a guy that has the NBA type traits that Ian Jackson has. Let's test these defenders and let's see what they're really made of. So I think that's the biggest thing, because we've talked about it with just about everybody on this roster. This is a team that is built off of confidence. When they are playing confidently, they are a legitimately good basketball team. They are a team that we look at and say can be a Sweet 16 team, and who knows from there, depending on what happens with a guy like RJ Davis if he hits his stride. But when they are off of their game, when they're in their own heads, this is a team that, is on the brink of potentially being, out of the tournament. So, with Ian Jackson, I think getting back on track, it's just about showing him that we're still confident in you. We still trust that we can, run our offense through you. And I think early in the game, he'll get a good amount of touches. Hopefully, this is a rebound performance from him, which I do expect. I think he's a guy that definitely plays more mature than his age. We've seen that with the way that he's been able to sort of take over and control everything that Carolina was doing offensively prior to yesterday's game. So I feel pretty good that this key to the game will happen. Hopefully it's enough for Carolina in the end.
The last key to the game for me, I put control the glass, because that means you can control the tempo. On paper, Carolina plus 4.5 in the rebounding department over Wake Forest. And Carolina has quietly rebounded into a quality rebounding team. They're not dominant. They're not overwhelming, but all things considered, they're sixth in the conference, I think, in rebounding. They average over 38 rebounds per game. I think as Carolina fans, that's pretty impressive, all things considered. The fact that the first 15, 16 games of the year, our leading rebounder was a guard and not even a big man. But you go back to Saturday in that loss, one of the big things was Carolina didn't get to play in transition. Did not get to get into their secondary break as much because they did not get the type of stops that they needed to get on the break and run and generate easy offense. And I think they scored 11 points in the fast break. So it told you that whenever they were able to run, they were able to convert, and it made the game easier for them offensively. But that just wasn't nowhere near consistent enough. In a game that was played primarily in the half court the other day. Wake Forest isn't going to be afraid to push the tempo. They'll look for their secondary breaks just as well, and they'll look to run off of misses and turnovers just like Carolina is. But it's a game on the road against a team that views you as a rival, and a team that knows how big this game is. It's going to be a battle on the interior. It's going to be a war. And I thought for the most part, Carolina was there the other day, and they met the challenge. They only got out rebounded by one, despite letting Reynaud go off for the double-double that he went off for. But you look back in Carolina's winning streak, they were starting to get to what they did last year, where they were starting to really overwhelm opponents on the glass, and they were really starting to really control that area of the game. They have to get back to that in this one. The numbers should suggest that happens, but rebounding is a lot like defense. It really comes down to effort and want to. This team has to, I think, be aggressive, making sure they secure defensive rebounds, but also get to the offensive glass, try to get some second chance scoring opportunities. All in all, though, they need to control the tempo from start to finish. I think that, as much as anything, gives them the chance that they need to win the ball game.
Yeah, I mean, rebounding always a key. But you're right. In terms of controlling the pace of the game, that's probably going to be how they're going to end up doing it, because this is a Wake Forest team that is only turning the ball over 11.5 times a game. So not nearly as good with holding on to the ball as Stanford, but still they've done a decent job of it. And then you go to the other side, and they're a team that forces over 14 turnovers a game. They are inside of the top 50 in the country at turnovers forced. So for Carolina, you don't want to give this team second chances. That's the biggest thing for me in this game. And the biggest reason why you want to out-rebound them is because if they have these second chance opportunities, there is a good chance that they can hurt you. But in terms of controlling the pace of the game, yeah, that's another way that you can do it, is rebound and run off of those rebounds. You've got the athleticism to be able to do it. It's just at times it feels like, for some reason, I don't know if it's something that Hubert wants to do. Wouldn't shock me with, what we've seen from him in terms of his late game strategy. They just don't seem to be that aggressive getting up the court. And it doesn't make any sense, because we've seen when they are aggressive, it leads to easy baskets almost every time, because they have guys that can finish through contact. They have guys that do a pretty good job of finishing at the rim, especially because when you're out on the break, it makes it much more difficult for a big man to be able to affect your shot. Like the other day, if you're able to get out on the fast break a little bit more, that could take a guy that's 7-1 out of the game. Where if you go into the half court and you have to consistently drive the basket, you're going to allow a big man of Reynaud's size to be a factor. So that's something that I think Carolina wants to do, should want to do every time that they're out on the floor. And hopefully that's the mindset that they take to this game. But yeah, in order to be able to do that, you're going to have to rebound well in this game. Something that I think you're right. I thought Carolina did a pretty decent job throughout the day of doing that against Stanford, but this is a game against a team that is not rebounding well. You have to be able to take care of that area of the game.
All right, it's time for us to make our picks. Carolina enters the game with a 60 61% chance to win according to ESPN's Basketball Power Index. I'll let you go first. Who wins the game and why?
I mean, everything is telling me to pick against Carolina in this game and to pick Wake Forest, because Wake Forest is a team that now feels like they are sort of generating a little bit of momentum. But, I mean, Carolina, it feels like this is a game that they're going to know they have to win. Because if you lose this game, I mean, this is not a bad team. But again, that would mean that you have 2 quad 3 losses. One of them, I think, would eventually become, and I would believe that with the win, Wake Forest would then become a quad 1 loss. But that adds another quad 1 loss for Carolina as well. I think this team knows that they cannot really lose a lot of games during this stretch, because their most difficult stretch of the season is coming up here. I think they're going to be locked in. I think they're going to be motivated after the loss. And I feel like this is a game where you see Ian Jackson take back over. Coming off of that performance against Stanford, I think there's going to be motivation to show, look, that was just a day that some freshmen have. I'm still a guy that is capable of, depending on, how the season ends up finishing, winning ACC Player of the Year, being the best freshman in this conference. I think he's going to be motivated to show that. And, the one thing that I can't get over with Wake Forest is how bad of a 3-point shooting team they are. Meanwhile, on the other side, they do, teams have had success being able to shoot the ball from beyond the arc against them. Hopefully that's the case for Carolina. And I think they find a way to win it. I think it's going to be a lot like the Stanford game. It's going to be a nail biter. It's not going to be easy, but I do think Carolina comes away with the victory.
Yeah, if you wanted to pick Wake Forest, I couldn't be mad. I probably couldn't even argue it with the way that Wake Forest has played, with how important this game is for them, and what we saw from the last time that we saw Carolina take the basketball court. But I've seen Steve Forbes and I've seen his program in these spots before come up short. And until they win a big game, I'm going to expect them to lose these types of games. Now tomorrow or Tuesday, I would not necessarily hate it, but I hate it in general because I've gotten a chance to know Steve over the years. He's first off, a good basketball coach. Also just one of the best people, one of the best characters that we have in the conference. And I hate to see him lose his job, which I think is on the table if this team misses a tournament this year. But unfortunately, the wrapper on his team and his program is they can't win big games. And until that happens, I'm gonna put my trust and faith in a team that has a coach that's won big games, and a team that has players on it that has played and won in big games. And then it's a team that I think knows that they're still peaking, and that Saturday is not going to define what the rest of the season is going to be for them in a negative way. I think Carolina bounces back. I think they go on the road. They play the type of defense that we've expected them to play since we got into ACC play. Ian Jackson looks like Ian Jackson. You get contributions from the rest of your backcourt. You get what you've been getting up front from Jalen Washington and Van Allen Lubin. And I think Carolina wins a fun, tight, contested ball game on the road to get this thing back in the right direction, and hopefully get back on another winning streak, which Carolina is in need of with the schedule they have coming up. No matter what happens, we'll have you covered on the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Preview of that game will be posted on Tuesday morning. So day of the game, especially with the late tip, I'll have you previewed. I'll have the preview ready to go for that game as I continue to take you through the basketball season. The recap will be posted on Wednesday morning. And then, of course, on Thursday, all of our attention will be on Caleb Wilson and his announcement. Carolina is in the lead. They got logged for a crystal ball prediction for him over the weekend and are looking to land their most significant target of the 2025 recruiting class. As for football, busy weekend for Bill Belichick and his staff, landing multiple players out of the portal and getting a head start on that 2026 class as well. In addition to more staff hires, Anthony has you covered on that front. Every bit of news that's come out of the Kenan Football Center, we've got you covered wall to wall as well. We encourage you to visit the website every single morning, afternoon, and evening for the latest and the best Carolina basketball, Tar Heel football coverage. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform. Simply search the Four Corners Podcast and we'll pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the remainder of the basketball season. Well, with that, guys, that is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.